Sometimes buying your first home can almost feel like learning a new language. All these new terms getting thrown at you, and a lot of people don't really take the time beforehand to kind of like anticipate some of these things that are going to come up. Fortunately, nowadays it's pretty easy to pull out Google on your phone and look up, what the term escrow means. But I know that this video will be very helpful to help explain terms that I guarantee you will hear every single one of these as you go throughout a transaction. This will help you feel more confident, more informed, and ready to make smart decisions on your home buying journey. So let's dig in. Okay, so I have arranged this in literally no particular order. However, I think everything I'm going to talk about is just as relevant as the last. So the first term, and I figured I'd start with maybe the first thing you might do in your real estate journey, is pre-approval. What is a pre-approval? Well, a pre-approval is basically a letter from a lender that says you as a buyer are qualified for financing up to a certain point. In a pre-approval, a lender reviews your finances and gives you a written estimate on how much you will be able to borrow. A pre-approval is much stronger than a pre-qualification. And why is a pre-approval important? Well, first of all, it's important to know how much money you're working with. And also, when submitting an offer, the seller is going to want to see a pre-approval from a lender so that they know that you are serious and that you actually have means to pay for the house that you want to buy. And on this pre-approval, you'll have obviously your budget, probably a rough estimate on your interest rate, all the terms involved with your financing, and how long this takes kind of depends on the lender. But I would say anywhere between like 1 to 3 days to get pre-approved is like a pretty good estimate. Sometimes it can be sooner. Sometimes it might take a little bit longer if you got like a really sketchy credit history or something like that. But typically you could rely on like a 1 to 3 turnaround once you've sent the lender all of your information and all of the documents that they need to do that pre-approval. Number 2 on the list, closing costs. And I actually have an entire video about this on this channel. But basically, closing costs are fees and expenses paid at the end of the transaction. These include things like lender fees, title insurance, taxes, and this is all on top of the price of the home. We usually say a safe bet as to how much closing costs you can anticipate is usually around 3% of the purchase price. So if you're buying a house for $300,000, you can expect to pay somewhere around $9,000 in closing costs. Now, in your offer, sometimes you can negotiate to have the seller pay your closing costs. You can ask the seller to pay a portion of your closing costs. There's also down payment assistance programs that will give you money to help pay for your closing costs up front. Some of those programs can cover up to $18,000, and the only thing you're out of pocket would be $1,000. Pretty crazy stuff. I swear I'm not making it up. I think it's important to understand how much closing costs may be and kind of anticipate that, but also understand that seller contribution to closing costs is very often negotiated in a purchase agreement. Obviously, don't rely on that, but just wanted to disclose that yes, it's not super uncommon to get some type of contribution from the seller towards your closing costs. Okay, the next term on our list is comps, short for comparables, but 99.9% of the time, people are referring to these as comps. Comps are essentially recently sold homes that are similar to another home, and it's used to kind of determine fair market value. So I'll give you 2 examples of when comps are being used. Let's say you're interested in buying a home and you ask your realtor to find some comps or do a CMA, a comparative market analysis, to see past inventory and make sure that the house that you want to put an offer on is priced fairly. So your realtor will go on the MLS, that's another word that we will go over, and we'll pull up homes in and around that neighborhood with similar bed, bath, garage, square footage, things like that, and see what those houses sold for and compare it to the price of this home that you're interested in and make sure that, hey, that's not overpriced, or that, hey, it's underpriced, whatever it may be. Comps are also typically used on the sell side when a seller is determining the price in which they should list list their home. Usually, typically, a listing agent will do a comparative market analysis and they will look up comps in the neighborhood to help kind of determine what should we list this house at so that we know that we're not overpricing it, because we don't want it to sit on the market for so long, but you also don't want to underprice it. So that's what comps are. That's when they're used. Don't call them comparables, call them comps. Everyone will think you're cool. They'll know that you kind of know what's going on, no big deal. And then next up on our list is contingencies. You might not hear this word contingencies until you get to your offer writing process, because contingencies are basically contract conditions that must be met in order for the sale to go through. So common contingencies would be inspection contingency, financing contingency, appraisal contingencies, maybe a home sale contingency. And so to put that into practice, say you have a 7-day inspection contingency on your offer. And that's basically saying, okay, I have 7 days to do my inspection, and this sale is contingent on everything going okay in my inspection. If it doesn't, I'm going to back out and the deal is off. Same thing applies for financing. Hey, I'm going to buy this house so long as my financing goes through. It's kind of like, I don't want to say a caveat to the offer, but it's more of just like really a condition. It's like, hey, I will do this with the condition that everything works the way it should in this part. Another example, something that's less common, but something I've personally helped with is like I mentioned earlier, the home sale contingency, which basically says, hey, here's my offer and here's what I'm willing to pay, and I will buy this home so long as I'm able to sell the home that I currently own, which that's kind of like a risky contingency. It works. It's not super common, but it does happen and you can make it work. It's just a lot of like threading the needle and making sure that everything kind of goes to plan. But my point, that is what contingencies are. That's how they work. That's kind of what they mean in a real estate transaction. The next one we're going to go over is debt to income ratio. And this kind of piggybacks off of pre-approval, just in the sense that you'll probably hear this term when you're getting pre-approved, when you're first speaking to your lender. And I know it's kind of self-explanatory, debt to income ratio. However, I think it's worth talking about because it is very important. This is basically a measure for lenders to see how much of your monthly income goes towards paying debt. This is important because a lower debt to income ratio makes getting approved for a loan a lot easier. A higher debt to income ratio, higher risk. You're not holding on to as much money every month as someone else who doesn't have as much debt. And so typically what lenders like to see is somewhere around 36% debt to income ratio. So 36% of your monthly income going towards debt, the other 64% being cash in your pocket, essentially. Lenders will allow for a higher debt to income ratio, but 36%, that's really that sweet spot, really what lenders want to see, and will really help kind of make the pre-approval process go a little bit smoother. The next term we're going to be talking about is earnest money. Earnest money is essentially a good faith payment, and it's something that'll apply when you're making your first offer, especially once your offer gets accepted. Earnest money is due 2 days after offer acceptance here in Minnesota. But basically, like I said, it's a good faith payment. It's basically a buyer's way of showing their intent to buy a home. It's you putting a little skin in the game to say, hey, I'm serious about buying this house. Here's some money to hold on to while we go through the transaction, so you know that I'm being serious. This money gets held in an escrow account, usually with the listing brokerage, but it kind of depends. And at the end of the transaction, it does get applied towards closing costs or your down payment. Again, also depends. And so how much is earnest money? How much do you pay? Typically, earnest money is 1% of the purchase price. So $300,000, 1% of that being $3,000. Anything over that 1% is kind of just a show of strength, but also showing more intent. Anything below 1% can be a little weird. I can really only recall one time someone doing less than 1%, and the listing agents did make note of it. I think they ended up being fine with it. It did kind of show some signs of like, hey, well, that's, we'd like to see a little bit more skin in the game to know you're serious. Okay, next up on this list is equity. And to explain this most simply, I will say that equity is the portion of your home that you truly own. A rough way to figure out your equity is the home's market value minus what you still owe on your mortgage. Anything left over, there's your equity, there's your profit on the home. I won't get too into the weeds on equity because honestly, that's an entire can of worms, a whole rabbit hole that I could go down. And so I think just that simple, easy to understand definition will do it for equity. There are a lot of things that can affect your equity: the market conditions, the condition of your home, how you've maintained it as you've owned it. There are ways to force equity by putting money into the home, renovating, things like that. But equity itself is essentially, if you were to sell your home and pay off your mortgage with those sales, whatever is left is your equity. That's your profit. That's the money you have made, the money you've gotten from your home. The next term is escrow or in escrow. And being in escrow is basically when a neutral third party is holding funds and documents until all conditions of the sale are met. So basically you get under contract and deposit your earnest money. You are in escrow until closing day. You might hear terms like an escrow account, which is basically, again, a third party person holds funds in this escrow account until certain conditions are met. I'll give you an example to help kind of better understand like an escrow account. I had some clients that were closing on a new build and the sod, the grass, had yet to be laid on the property prior to closing, and we were kind of unsure whether or not that would be done before closing or if we were going to have to escrow funds until that did get done. So what it means to escrow funds is that the bank is lending on this home that is supposed to be 100% complete, sod included. Well, if there's no sod, if there's still landscaping to be done, the bank is going to say, well, someone needs to throw up some money for the sod because that's the only way this is going to work if we're going to lend this full amount to buy this home. So what this means is that my buyer was now required to put 1.5 times the amount of the sod into an escrow account, which would have been held there until the sod was laid, and then they would release those funds back to the buyer. Okay, and then moving on to PMI or private mortgage insurance. You will probably hear this again when speaking with a lender for the first time. Private mortgage insurance is basically insurance that you as a borrower may have to pay if your down payment is below 20%. Why is this a thing? Because if you're putting down less than 20%, technically you are a riskier borrower, and because of that, lenders will require you to pay for private mortgage insurance so that it protects them in the event that you default and aren't paying your mortgage. This is most commonly wrapped into your monthly mortgage payment that you pay to the bank, and your lender actually has an escrow account in which they hold funds to pay for things like private mortgage insurance. And like I said, private mortgage insurance is required if you put less than 20% down. And so if you've only put 5% down to get your home, once you reach that 20% of your mortgage paid off, the lender will take away that PMI and you will no longer have to pay that as part of your monthly payment. Okay, next term is appraisal. This is something that will probably come up a couple weeks after you get under contract, after you go through inspection. Once the inspection contingency is over, your lender will then call for an appraisal. Basically, an appraisal is when a third-party inspector comes out and looks at the home and basically determines its value. They are basically giving their professional estimate on the home's value. Why this is important is because most lenders require an appraisal so they know that the $300,000 that they're lending to you to buy this house is going towards a house that's worth $300,000, not $275,000. In the event that the appraiser does say, hey, this is only worth $275,000, not $300,000, we find ourselves in a situation that is an appraisal gap because the lender's only going to lend based on what the appraisal says. They're only going to lend on how much that home is worth. So if your appraisal comes in low, you can either try and dispute it, find your own comps, see if there's any way you can wiggle that price, or you're just left with this appraisal gap, which falls on kind of you as the buyer to pay for. Sometimes you can get the seller to negotiate and maybe they'll split some of it depending on how much it is. It's kind of hard to say, and it also depends on whether or not the seller wants to let the transaction fall through. That can definitely be a dicey situation. It doesn't happen too often. Typically, houses are priced priced fairly, and the appraisal will come back kind of right at that purchase price. But there is always that room for something like an appraisal gap to happen. I want to cut away from the list for a second and just say, hey, I'm Paul Winkleman. I am a realtor here in Minnesota in the Twin Cities. I work on the To the Twin Cities team, and you're watching this video on my YouTube channel, which is all about helping specifically first-time home buyers understand the home buying process, navigate it, answer any questions, just be as helpful of a resource as I can. If you have any questions, if you want to sit down and talk to me, if you want to just pick my brain, I'd be more than happy. You can reach out to me on Instagram. You can send me an email at paul@tothetwincities.com. You can comment on this video. You can send me a text, whatever you'd like. Any of those mediums, I guarantee you will be able to get a hold of me. And also, I just wanted to say, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for watching this video. Back to the list. Okay, next term is an escalation clause. An escalation clause typically used when in multiple offer situations, when there's more than one person trying to buy the same house. And basically what an escalation clause says, in addition to your purchase agreement or your offer, is that your purchase agreement says, hey, we want to buy this house for $300,000. Your escalation clause may be something like, we will pay up to $340,000. What your escalation clause says is that we will beat any offer by X amount of dollars, let's say $2,500, and we will beat that by $2,500 up to $340,000. So you're offering 300 grand, and maybe the only other offer ahead of you is at 320. So this escalation clause says that you'll pay 322.5 if someone's offering 320. And that, again, just escalates until you get to your cap, which we said 340. So we'll beat any offer by $2,500 up to $340,000. It's a very strong term, very enticing for the seller, can be a little scary as a buyer. So you just want to make sure that your cap is something that you can actually afford, because sometimes, especially in a really hot market, they will crawl up, and you know, $40,000 over list, $300,000 is pretty intense, but $40,000 over is not crazy, you know, maybe a more expensive home. Next up on the list is loan to value ratio. Your loan to value ratio is the percentage of the home value that is financed by the loan. So let's say you're buying a home and you are putting 20% down as a down payment. Your loan to value ratio then is 80%, because 20% of the home's purchase is cash, it's your money. The other 80% would be financed. That's the amount that is going on the loan. Obviously, a lower loan to value ratio means less risk for the lender, easier to get financing approved if you have a big fat down payment. Maybe you're using an FHA loan and you're only being required to put 3% down. Then you have a 97% loan to value ratio. Not uncommon, but definitely more risky as the lender, as they're coughing up way more money as opposed to your 3%. Next one, and I'm realizing I kind of touched on this one already, but mortgage escrow account. We already kind of talked about being in escrow and what an escrow account is. Specifically, the mortgage escrow account would be the account that your lender uses to hold money to pay for your property taxes and your homeowner's insurance, and this is paid as part of your monthly mortgage. So basically, the lender holds money in this escrow account and they use it to pay your property taxes and homeowner's insurance. The lender pays those bills for you when they're due so that you aren't paying them in one large lump sum. And you are the one paying into this escrow account. The lender is just setting that money aside and, like I said, paying these bills when the time comes due. Your monthly mortgage payment is made up of 4 things, and I will get into that because that's a little bit later in the video. But in that monthly payment, part of that money is going straight into this escrow account, and your lender from there is taking care of actually paying those bills. Pretty nice of them, honestly, to take that off your plate. Shout out to the lenders. Okay, next up, MLS. I think I might have mentioned this earlier in the video. MLS stands for Multiple Listing Service, and this is basically the database that all real estate agents and realtors use to share listings, put listings on the market, and also access information on those listings for homes that are for sale, coming soon, things like that. So even homes that are on Zillow, Zillow, Realtor.com, and things like that, they are all entered through the MLS. That is where they get posted first, and from there they scatter about to all these different websites. But the MLS is like the main guy, that's the brains of the operation, and that's where everything goes. When clients send me listings from Zillow or places like that, I take that address and immediately go to the MLS and look at the home in the MLS, as it's the most accurate, the most up-to-date, and frankly just like the most reliable place when looking at listings like that. Okay, next up is PITI, which is the 4 things that your monthly mortgage payment are made up of that I mentioned just earlier. PITI: principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. These are the 4 things that make up your monthly mortgage payment. Principal being paying for the actual loan, interest, paying the interest on the loan, taxes being the property taxes. This money goes into your escrow account that your lender then pays the property taxes for, and then insurance, your homeowner's insurance. And again, this getting paid to the lender, to the escrow account who is paying that bill for you. Obviously, it's still coming out of your paycheck though. So PITI, you'll for sure hear that probably again when you're first speaking to your lender, but that's what that stands for: principal, interest, taxes, insurance. Now you know. Okay, next up on the list, this is kind of a bonus and probably something you will not deal with until years after home ownership, but it is refinancing, and I think it's just a good thing to know because people talk about refinancing, the refi, all the time. Basically, refinancing is the act of paying off one loan by obtaining another. This is in general done in the event that you want to secure better loan terms. Often people will refinance when interest rates drop super low. Maybe they had a really high interest rate when they bought their home and now it has dipped way down, so they want to refinance, get better terms for their loan. And yeah, like I said, you're basically obtaining a loan to pay off an old loan at better terms, refinancing. Okay, next up on the list is seller concessions. This is something that will probably get put to use during your inspection contingency, if at all. Seller's concessions are basically costs the seller agrees to pay on behalf of the buyer, usually at closing. And these could be things like closing costs or repair credits or money in order to help finalize the sale. So to give you an example, let's say you have gone through your inspection and you found a bunch of like little repairs that need to be done in the home, and instead of maybe asking the seller to fix the leaky sink, do this, do that, instead of kind of giving them a punch list, which may really deter the seller from wanting to do any of it, you can ask the seller for concessions. So maybe instead of giving them 5 little things to do, it's easier to say, hey, seller, to give us $1,000 credit at closing to go towards repairs to be made that were found during inspection. Or also, if you're asking for closing costs, if you're asking the seller to pay 50% of the closing costs, then these would also be considered concessions because it is money from the seller on behalf of the buyer to help finalize the sale. Next up on the list, seller's disclosure. This will come up when you actually start looking at homes. What a seller's disclosure is basically a huge document, a questionnaire almost, that gets given to the seller to fill out prior to putting their home on the market. This is the opportunity for the seller to disclose any and everything that they know about the house, things like the age of the roof, any improvements that have been made, any work that has been done. Maybe there's flooding in the basement, maybe they put in a new deck, maybe they redid the garage, anything that they know about the home, mold, disease, trees in the yard. Maybe there's a woodpecker that comes every spring and like destroys this one piece of the siding. Any and everything, all that information, all material facts, this is where that gets disclosed. And as an agent, we have access to this in the supplements on a listing, so we are able to see all these things in addition to obviously going and seeing the home in person. Sometimes you might see the seller's disclosure printed and sitting on the counter or something at a home for showing so everyone can see it. I will often, if there is serious interest, if a client has serious interest in a home, I will send them over a copy of the seller's disclosure so they can look at that, kind of just get some more information on there. Sometimes it's very helpful. Sometimes in the event that the seller was just a landlord and they never lived in the home, they'll fill out something called the seller's disclosure alternative, which basically has like little to no information in there. Usually it just confirms whether or not someone made meth in the house, if it's in a flood zone. Obviously there's other things, but yeah, not very helpful typically. And so then kind of piggybacking off of that, this next one, and this one is hyper specific to, I mean, the Twin Cities, particularly like Minneapolis, St. Paul, St. Louis Park. I know there's like a few towns and cities in the metro that require these, but this is called a TISH report. And TISH stands for Truth in Sale of Housing. And basically this is a required report in these cities, in addition to a seller's disclosure, where a city inspector will come out and check the property for basic safety and maintenance issues or condition. It really is just a report on the home's condition. It's different than an inspection. These TISH reports are mainly just for transparency, but they can be very helpful. They'll point out like, hey, the ceiling headed down to the basement is too low. You need a railing right here on the wall for this to be code. You know, GFCI outlets next to sinks or water sources, things like that. A TISH report is not going to say, hey, the homeowner took out a wall and expanded the kitchen in 2018. That's for the seller. This is strictly, it's kind of like the same role an appraiser takes. Third party, just like, here's my checklist, here are the things I look at, and then here it is. And they can also determine whether or not there are required fixes that need to be done in order for the home to sell. So sometimes a TISH report can jam people up because they can say like, hey, there are things that are against code that need to get taken care of before this home can sell. Okay, next one is under contract. This is a fun one. This is exciting. This is basically when your offer gets accepted. You are under contract when both parties have signed the purchase agreement and it is fully executed. So when you get your offer accepted, there's a good chance your agent will call you and say, oh my God, you're under contract. Congratulations. Very exciting stuff. But this is just like the lingo, the terms that in the real estate world will be used when it's like, hey, we got her under contract, just got the purchase agreement back. Everyone's stoked. Heck yeah. I should note, this obviously does not mean that the deal has closed. It's closed, when everything's finalized. Under contract is just like, it's the escrow period. It's like, hey, we got it under contract. There are contingencies in place, whether it be inspection, financing, appraisal, whatever that need to happen in order for this to officially be closed. And that's all I have for this video. I believe that was 20. I hope you know that if you watched all this, you are now sitting in a much more prepared and comfortable spot than most people who just dive in and don't really take the time to even just hear these terms once and just have a very baseline understanding of what these are. Let me know if this is helpful. I'd be happy to make more of these. These are cool, fun videos to kind of knock out. So yeah, appreciate you watching, and I will see you on the next one.